know who's here, but you don't know. So I must make sure that we share that information. So we really welcome you from the different countries. Today we're going to the program. Yesterday we recorded through the program, and because we started late yesterday, but we finished yesterday, except questions and answers for one panel, the first panel. So we'll find time to deal with those issues. Today we'll start with panel 2. But before we do panel 2, we agreed that we will invite the minister to speak to us. She was supposed to speak yesterday. So she's going to speak to us like it is yesterday. And this is very special. That's why I wanted to do it myself. We have invited those who know. Those who don't know, don't worry about it. We have invited the president of Namibia and Algeria to be with us, or send us a statement, or do whatever, because they are real allies on the continent to support us in what we're doing. We also invited the president of Brazil to also either be here or send a statement. Now I want the minister to hear it again for the second time today, that we were really taking a chance. You know, a civil society inviting a president of another country in terms of protocol, it doesn't make sense. And but we did that, informed our the leadership of our country. They were going to be together with President Ramaphosa. We communicated with the embassy, and we are pleased, Minister, that you have come. The president didn't just send a message or record it, but decided to send the minister to come and speak to us. Now, this is Minister Yvonne Dausap. I hope I'm pronouncing it right. We'll correct it when you come, but I've made it Sotho. You know, I've Sothofied it. She's the minister, MP, and she's a legal practitioner, Minister of Justice in Namibia. Our President Mbumba entrusted her message with her, and she's here to deliver that message from the president. So she's not doing greetings. That's not greetings. It's a message from the president of Namibia. So I would like to welcome you then.
Thank you and good morning. Yesterday I was a little bit more prepared in terms of my appearance. I had done some makeup. So I'm sorry for those that may have other expectations about my good looks this morning. Reverend Frank Chikane, esteemed activist and guest, media, ladies and gentlemen, all protocol observed. I was initially scheduled to deliver this address on behalf of our head of state and government, President Nangolo Mbumba, yesterday. I'm therefore grateful that I'm able to do so now, albeit with a slightly revised version of the remarks. The President sends his warm regards and tenders his sincere apologies for not being able to attend this important and very timely conference. He unfortunately is attending to another meeting which was pre-planned. But I'm here and happy to be making these brief remarks on behalf of the government of Namibia. This during a time when we are discussing the very disheartening question of the freedom of the people of Palestine. It is the response of the nations of the world, particularly the global north, that makes this meeting even more relevant and urgent. We value this timely opportunity to be part of a global mobilization effort aimed at holding Israel accountable for the crimes committed against the Palestinian people and to dismantle the Israel apartheid agenda from the river to the sea. Our interest, our interest in this conference also relates to another important opportunity it presents. The opportunity for our people, the citizenry we present as African leaders, to have a closer connection to the issue of Palestine. This is so because many may question, rightly or wrongly, what they consider government's preoccupation with the plight of Palestinians, whilst we have problems in countries closer to our territory, such as the Democratic Republic of Congo, South Sudan, Haiti, or even the challenges we face domestically. This platform is therefore opportune given its location and proximity to our realities. I agree with many of the speakers that took the floor yesterday. There is no other time than now, but also that it is no longer enough to just speak out about the unrelenting suffering of the people of Palestine without any tangible changes to the lives and livelihoods of the Palestinian women, men, and children. But speaking out and meeting is just as important. The question is whether or not it has achieved the desired outcomes. And if it has not, what must we do differently? It is true that we need new ways of doing things. Otherwise, the Israelis and their allies, or as suggested by my dear sister from Kenya, the occupiers of the Palestinian territory, will have no reason to shift the paradigm of carnage to a paradigm of peace, unless we do, using the struggle approach to human rights as espoused by my late Professor Christoph Haynes, who offered the formula that human rights equals legitimate resistance, and legitimate resistance equals human rights. I will return to this briefly towards the end. We further reaffirm our hope that during these discussions, we will critically interrogate the real meaning of the two-state solution, because it does not entirely seem like a restorative restitution project that will return Palestinian land that they have lost. This two-state solution sounds like a further displacement of Palestinians from at least part of their indigenous land. Something Namibians know too well, as we have not been able to recover the dispossessed land even 34 years into our independence. This is because, as part of the negotiated settlement for our independence, we had to promise protection of the stolen land. Now, we have to buy back the land, and in many instances, the asking prices are exorbitant. We suggest, from a Namibian perspective, this thing has been printed on both sides. We suggest, from a Namibian perspective, that the Palestinian struggle heroes take cue from this experience to protect the integrity of their land. Palestinians have a right to self-determination. They have a right, too, to enjoy all human rights as set out in the 75-year-old Universal Declaration on Human Rights. These rights that are supposedly, on all accounts, indivisible, interrelated, universal, and interdependent, these rights we are all too often reminded to adhere to, and that are in some instances, and when it suits the global north, imposed on us for access to aid, investments, and loans, often because it benefits their strategic interests and foreign policy outlook. We therefore support that the double standards and selective morality we see in the collective conscience of civilized nations be characterized for what it is: hypocrisy of the highest order. Equally, Namibia remains committed to the cause of the people of the Western Sahara. This conference will not be complete without some consideration of the plight of the Sahrawi people. The 1884 Berlin Conference was indiscriminate, and its impact lasted for years, continuing to cause untold suffering on the people of the continent. Therefore, our struggle is against imperialism and colonial oppression, regardless of who the victim or the perpetrator is. We are therefore concerned that whilst there are stark similarities between the causes of the Sahrawis and the Palestinians, there is also a disconnect in the sustained efforts to address their plights. From a Namibian perspective, the struggle is intertwined. We are unable to segregate the struggle because the segregation is polarizing the struggle for self-determination. This is creating a loophole for the divide and rule tactics that we have seen dividing African leaders on the questions of Western Sahara and Palestine. This may require us to investigate the real reasons why money and resource limitations appear to divide African leaders. Uncomfortable as it may seem, we must have these conversations too. Let the allegations of greed and corruption not be the scapegoat conversation on these issues. Let us have honest and frank discussions about what seems like a dilemma the African Union finds itself. Consistent with calls to broaden the scope of activism, we can report that on 16 April 2024, one of the youngest members of the Namibian Parliament moved an unopposed motion in the National Assembly for it to reaffirm its support to the urgent decolonization of Western Sahara and the right to self-determination of the Sahrawi people. And it called upon the international community to uphold the principles of justice and decolonization by actively supporting the people from Western Sahara's legitimate struggle for independence, and that we declare the continued commitment of Namibia to stand in solidarity with Western Sahara until justice is achieved for the Sahrawi people. Similarly, and consistent with our collective solidarity that are against colonial and settler occupation, another member of the Namibian Parliament equally moved an unopposed motion in the National Assembly, emphasizing the imperative for all parties involved in conflicts to adhere strictly to their obligations under international law, including international humanitarian law and international human rights law, and recognizing the disproportionate impact of conflict on the lives and well-being of children, women, and other vulnerable civilization populations, and underscoring the humanitarian principles of compassion, equity, impartiality, neutrality, and autonomy for the people of Palestine. These motions are likely to increase broader conversations in our societies on these issues. There may be need for us to consider closer collaborations with like-minded sister organizations in the region and elsewhere to provide speakers at academic and related platforms for increased public engagement. The ongoing choking off of Gaza from any means of survival and entrapment of all Palestinians in Rafah, as if in a death camp, brings to mind images emanating from World War II. But closer to home, the carnage of the 20th century genocide in Namibia against the Ovaherero and Nama peoples. The pain, the suffering, and the impact, while not entirely comparable, legitimizes our struggle credentials, not to be bystanders as a nation and as the continent and the Global South collective. Our unity in 1963, with the establishment of the Organization of African Unity, was the catalyst to our freedom. Today, it is that same unity, rallied and anchored around a common purpose, that we believe must change the course of genocide against the people of Palestine. As a country, we think the African Union must be reformed from within. If it appears that it has lost the vision around fighting for the eradication of colonial oppression and imperialism. Perhaps we just need to remind each other of the historical pact of our founders, or better yet, what role Africa wants to play under the guide of Agenda 2063 and the Africa we want. This may require for us to use language consistent with what Africa wants to make out a case, even about Palestine in this instance. It is the one way of holding African leaders accountable on their promises. What is currently and have been happening for 100 years must now be settled as genocide and ethnic cleansing. The destruction of the educational facilities in Gaza, such as schools, libraries, universities, and the annihilation of the intellectual life and the killing of journalists cannot be characterized differently from its intent, other than calling it what it is, genocide. A flagrant violation of our Palestinian brothers and sisters' right to social, economic, and cultural development. Namibian people were the victims of genocide since 1893. Germany is now widely accepted to be committing its third genocide by associating itself with the ongoing genocide in Gaza. They are yet to atone, and negotiations on reparations are still not resolved. It is this kind of disregard for the importance of others' rights and the unabating impunity that makes people question the efficacy of international law. Admittedly, the flagrant disregard and disrespect for international law with complete impunity does not take away the sacrosanct nature and value of the International Criminal Court of Justice, International Criminal Court, and the totality of international law itself. But there is value in assessing whether there is need for reforms or strengthening of existing safeguards consistent with the norms and standards of a renewed human rights culture. Because the future of human rights depends on the actions of those who believe in it, like the cohort of us sitting in this room. Christoph Haynes further postulates this point by stating, and I quote, "It is the intensity and direction of their struggle that shapes the present, that guides history as it unfolds, and as such determines the new right and wrong." The truth is, the courage to embark on new struggles, as we hope to do post this conference, has no guarantees that we will be vindicated by history. Sadly, many Palestinian men, women, and children, including those that stood with them, will not see and might not see the freedom that they have died for. But, like we say in our national anthem, their blood will water your freedom. Like many liberation struggle heroes for Africa's independence, they fought, died, and never tasted the freedom. Of course, many of us will see it in our lifetime. And for that reason alone, it lies, and I quote, "on our shoulders to engage in the struggles that are necessary to realize the norms we wish to see and experience," end of quote. Namibia is ready to play its part in doing so and reiterates the stance taken during the oral submissions to the International Court of Justice. In light of which, Namibia commits to interrogate the possible impact of the diamond trade between Namibian and Israeli companies in relation In relation to the ongoing genocide and ethnic cleansing in Palestine, we certainly have no intention to act contrary to our stance to seek freedom for the people of Palestine. The fact that apartheid was declared, and I'm almost done, the fact that apartheid was declared a crime against humanity, and I know many still want me to talk, in the Apartheid Convention is a clear indication of how abhorrent the international community find the acts constituting this crime. We have no doubt that the conduct and actions of Israel have surpassed the threshold set out in the relevant instruments. We reiterate that the renewed call should be submitted to the prosecutor of the ICC to speed up the investigations into the situation and to remain steadfast in his task and mandate as provided for in the Rome Statute. We should therefore not waver and recall the principles set out in the treaties that binds us as nations, such as Pacta Sunt Servanda, obligations erga omnes, and reaffirm the system of higher norms. In Israel, like the rest of the international community, must consistently be called out to adhere to and respect international law and its systems, processes, and institutions. We agree with the sentiments expressed by Ms. Navi Pillay, chairperson of the Commission of Inquiry on the occupied Palestinian territory and former High Commissioner for Human Rights, who said, and I quote, "Every country and every member of the United Nations is equal in terms of their obligations to observe international law. So it's disturbing when one country continues to violate international law with the help of powerful states who say they support human rights. So it is disturbing if one country gets away with that," end of quote. It is our considered view that the Palestinians have the right to make use of the individual complaints mechanism available under the human rights instruments, and that this conference must consider this option as part of their outcomes in the end. Consequently, Namibia is appalled by the indiscriminate killing of women and children during this full-scale genocidal war waged by the Israel against Palestine. As they claim their fight is against Hamas only, yet this assertion is not borne out by the images of the number of women and children who are killed, some in cold blood. Segregation along racial, ethnical, and religious lines creates the perception that some people are lesser human beings than others, and that some should be dominated by others. This perpetuates the notion of inequality amongst peoples of the world. Namibia, as a nation that has experienced apartheid in all and in worst of its forms, should therefore not allow any nation or person to be subjected to this outdated, humiliating, and egregious method of warfare. Hence, we reaffirm our late president, may his soul rest in peace, outrage when he said, and I quote, "No peace-loving human being can ignore the carnage waged against Palestinians in Gaza," end of quote. Our presence here is a firm commitment to find solutions as part of the collective, but the aim is freedom for all oppressed and occupied nations. Thank you for your kind attention.
I just want to thank the Minister for the message, and will be pleased if you can pass over our message to the President, that we appreciate the trouble that he took to let you come here. And I thought before I hand over to the conference command, there's a conference command so I can sit down, I just want to say we have a very special relationship with Namibia. We were in the trenches together, in the camps together. We fought together against the same enemy, which was apartheid, because South Africa was occupying Namibia. They were in charge. They fought SWAPO as they fought us. Yeah, I'm going to wait until they free the minister. I can see they want to capture you, these guys. Yes, I just want to say, Minister, I didn't want to say this before you spoke. I just want to say that the day then the organophosphates chemical weapons were used against me, I was banned from entering Namibia. I was going to Namibia to go and speak there during the struggle. They gave me a banning order at the airport and told me if I bought the plane, I do it at my own risk. So I have the banning order still in my book. I suspect I'm the only South African who was inside the country who got banned. Those who were outside, of course. And when UN declared, was it 435 resolution, and the UN was going to take over, we decided now we're going to go irrespective of the banning order. And they thought they will fix me. So I went through the airport. They put chemical weapons in my 5 underpants. If one misses me, the other one would take me out. And so I arrived in Namibia, put one of those underpants, and we're driving to the north. And they had calculated that it will hit me when there are no hospitals right in the north. And God, being God, made it hit me 20 minutes before the last hospital. And I landed up in that hospital, and the Namibians took care of me, and I was brought back here at home. So I just want to say our struggle has been so intertwined. And I'm praying that the struggle for free Palestine will mobilize the neighbors to work the way in which we worked in this region. And I'm really praying that we mobilize them to take a position which will support Palestine. Thank you very much. I hand over to the command.
Yesterday, the minister, Dr. Naledi Pandor, challenged this gathering. And today, the minister is also challenging this gathering. Imbogodo is talking. It was well said. Watinta bafazi, watinta Imbogodo. Thank you, Minister. Oh, I'm being asked to translate. You strike a woman, you strike a rock. Watinta bafazi, watinta Imbogodo. I have a few announcements before I take us to the next panel or to the next session. I'm asking that Rabbi or Rabbi Seremula, to please come and see me. There is a package that you left in the conference room last night. Rabbi Seremula, please come and see me. Our comms is also asking from the speakers, even those from yesterday, they are asking that you please forward your speeches or your talks to me your written ones. They would love to capture all of those, not capture in a way of capturing, but please, all the speakers, if you can submit your speeches to me or to Aziz back at the comms. And then as we move forward, today, the next panel, where is this? Our next panel for the day will be delivered by my colleague Fatin Jarara. The panel is about legal, political, and narrative activism strategies to dismantle Israeli colonialism and apartheid. Fatin, over to you, my dear.
Good morning. Sabah al-khair. Assalamu alaikum. As I make the introduction of the panel, I'd like to ask the panelists to please be ready to join us on the podium. So, my name is Fatin Jarara. I'm a longtime member of Al-Auda, New York, the Palestine Right to Return Coalition, which is one of the oldest, if not the oldest, standing Palestinian organization in the so-called United States. We fight against the settler colonization of our land and for the right to return for all Palestinians to all of our land, Palestine. I also am a member of the Palestinian Assembly for Liberation, and I come from the land of Lenape Hoking, also sometimes known as New York. We believe that land back for Palestinians means land back for indigenous people on Turtle Island and everywhere on this earth. I know we said that we can't represent all of our people as one person, but I know that every Palestinian that I know that I'm here would like to ask me to thank the people of South Africa for not only hosting this conference, but also being an advocate for Palestinian people on a global scale in front of the whole world. So thank you to South Africa. I can say that confidently on behalf of the Palestinian people. This panel is called, it's panel number 2, and we thank you for joining us. Legal, Political, Narrative, and Activism Strategies to Dismantle Israeli Colonialism and Apartheid. We have joining us Raji Surani, Zain Dangar, Ali Abu Ni'ma, who will be joining us on video, and Rushan Dadu. So we're going to start with Ali Abu Ni'ma, who is the co-editor of the Electronic Intifada and a political commentator and analyst. I know that we, in my household, often watch his videos, especially as of late. And then we'll be followed by Raji Surani, Zain Dangar, and Rushan Dadu. Before we put on the video for Ali, I will just introduce the speakers. Raji Surani is a human rights lawyer and the director of the Palestinian Center for Human Rights. He is the coordinator of the Palestinian legal team who represents Palestinian victims at the International Court of Justice and a member of the South African legal team at the International Court of Justice. At the ICC, sorry. I hope I got that right. Then we have Zain Dangar, who is the Director General of Department of International Relations and Cooperation of South Africa. Before joining government, Zain was active in civil society. And lastly, we will have Roshan Dadu, who is a member of the steering committee of the Global Anti-Apartheid Conference and the coordinator of the South African BDS Coalition. So without further ado, we will be listening from Ali, and each speaker will have 15 minutes, and hopefully we'll have time for questions. Thank you.
Previous visits to South Africa, I have never felt myself to be in a truly free country, except when I'm in South Africa. And right now, I would have liked nothing more than to be in the warm embrace of comrades. And in the little that I've been able to hear of this morning's proceedings,
whilst they are fixing
the depth,
sound, in my TV programming, you don't allow space for nothing. I just want to say Zain Dengo has just gone out here. I didn't realize he's here. You can't hear me? Oh, now you can. Can you hear me? Yes, I just wanted to say I didn't realize Mr. Zain Dengo is here. But he's the Director General in Department of Foreign Affairs. And I just wanted to welcome him and say that thank you, because he assisted us a lot in making this conference a reality. So I would like to give him a big hand for that. You can...
Okay, so hopefully we'll hear from Ali, but in the meantime, we'll be hearing from Mr. Raji Surani. So please give it up for Mr. Raji Surani.
For the last 4 days, Israel launched its offensive in Rafah. As a very direct result of that, the entire eastern part of Rafah bombed by all ways and means, destroyed most of the building, and they took over Rafah crossing. People moved to the western part, but even western part has been bombarded. The heart of Rafah city and the city center, and many has been killed. Business as usual. Most of those has been killed are civilians. As a result, almost 120,000 moved from Rafah, luckily, not to Sinai, but to the middle camps. This is happening in Rafah, but rest parts of Gaza are not safe as well. They are bombing in Beit Hanun, Beit Lahia, Jabalia, Shijaiya, Gaza City, Deir el-Balah, Nusayrat. All the way along, civilians and civilian targets in the eye of the storm. Israel made great achievement in this war. They managed to kill as many as everybody knows, They managed to destroy 80% of Gaza houses, schools, hospitals, and infrastructure. They managed to displace almost 2 million people. They managed to make Gaza 2.4 million people starving. This is the most ethical army in the world. Their target, civilians, civilian targets. Their target, residential areas, hospitals, bakeries, desalination water plants, electricity plants, and above all that, women and children. Why they are doing that? For a simple reason. They are doing self-defense. Just as simple as that. And the entire West, from Biden, US administration, UK, Germany, and Western Europe, fully understand Israel's right of self-defense. And they didn't say that only. They went and visited in the early days to support Israel's right of self-defense and to show their unwavering legal, political, financial support for the right of self-defense for the state of Israel. This is Kafka. Kafka. We are talking about the belligerent, criminal, prolonged occupation in Palestine, and we are talking about the most well-documented conflict where it has been proved that Israel doing war crimes, crimes against humanity, ethnic cleansing for Palestinians in Gaza, West Bank, including Jerusalem. When Russia, as the West say, invaded and occupied Ukraine, the war stood. What's happening there? Invasion, occupation, can that happen at the 21st century? And Europe, US, stood firmly and they said, Ukrainians do have the right of self-determination. Ukrainians do have the right to confront the Russians by all ways, by all means, including armed struggle. And we call upon our people, that's what they say, the free people of Europe and US, to go join the struggle with their counterparts, the Ukrainians, against the invasion and the occupation of Russia to Ukraine. They didn't stop with that. More, they said,
rethinking the foreign policy and is
we will support Ukraine with arms and with money. They imposed on Russia 7 waves of sanctions. In any other state, it will be paralyzed totally. And that's, they said, because it's rightly said, we believe we have to act against occupation, invasion, against this aggression by the Russians. In old Rome, it used to be laws But these laws used to apply on masters, not slaves. Are the Palestinians the slaves of the 21st century? How this can happen? Plausible genocide taking place. The whole world watch it, see it live at the real time, broadcasted all over the globe. And even when the case represented to the ICC or ICJ, they are subject to be threatened. How dare they can think of imposing any level of sanctions against the Israeli occupation? There is two ways to deal with this world. Either we choose the rule of law or rule of jungle. We want the rule of law. We want to apply the rule of law, not the rule of jungle. Because that's what they are good at. They want to be selective and politicize international law, international humanitarian law, and the human rights. When we resorted to the universal jurisdiction in Europe 4 years in different European countries, using their own laws targeting the Israeli war criminals, politically, we were blocked by administrative measures and by legal and legislative measures. So using universal jurisdiction turned to be rather mission impossible. We resorted to the ICC, and Fatou Bensouda was a great ICC prosecutor. She acted according to her conscience and law as representative of victims and their case, and as the spine of the human rights lawyer who represent them. And she opened the investigation. Then we have Mr. KK, who was there since June 2021. And since then, due to political pressure mounted by US, Germany, UK, he didn't move 1 millimeter. He has the most well-documented conflict in history, but he moved nowhere. That's a big shame. In the Russian-Ukrainian conflict, after 1 year, he had warrant against Putin. What's happening?
Like white people.
In Israel, the Israeli leaders. Nothing.
Yeah, yeah.
When this war
I'm
erupted,
setting that up, you know. But I had you and Ali on my back, and I chose Ali.
we began to think of our ways
Yes,
and
he's on
means.
Zoom.
Genocide, genuine part of ICC mandate. And KK didn't move. So we were lucky enough
It will go over time because of
having South
but we
Africa
just have to manage them.
with its all legal, ethical, revolutionary weight represent Palestine and Palestinian people in the court. And this super fantastic combination of the legal team reflect a lot, morally, legally, and politically. South African, Irish, Palestinian legal team, who put it there January 11th, South Africa made history at the ICC as the ICJ in The Hague. It's not because a case represented to the ICJ, it's because Israel, for the first time ever, accused of the most serious charge, genocide, in front of the most important court on earth, the ICJ. And we showed the moral, legal superiority on the criminals who do war crimes, crimes against humanity, ethnic cleansing, and genocide in the court. I have been to South Africa 3 times, 3 occasions. The first one was in 2001 at the World Conference Against Racism. And South Africa showed that Israel is the new brand of apartheid. 3,027 NGOs across the globe said that in South Africa. In 2011, there was the Russell Tribunal for Palestine, and that was the popular court for free people across the globe. And South Africa was landmark on that. And they said Israel should be tried. And this year, January 11th, South Africa brought Israel to the ICJ, and we are here as part of the South African legal team in building the case against the criminals in Israel. We know, for those who undermine the work of law, ICJ, it's not going to liberate Palestine. The ICC will not liberate Palestine. Who liberate Palestine? The resilience of the people. Those who are standing on the ground. Those who are paying blood and pain and starvation. We know those who are resisting the occupation. Who will liberate Palestine? Israel will not end the occupation by decision by the UN or any other body. But those who are resisting the occupation and making the occupation and the genocide very costly for the other side, they will liberate Palestine. We will never give up. We will never lose the hope. We are on the right side of history. And we know, genuinely, we are defending just, fair, and right cause. Never, ever, Palestinians will be good victims for criminals. Never. And we will defend our dignity and our freedom. We will get it one day there. We are not alone. We are much, much stronger with the free, committed people across the globe like you. Keep the good work. keep the support, keep the solidarity. People of Palestine in need of the word free people support, and this will make big difference. Amanda.
Free Palestine. Free Palestine. From the river we'll be free. From the river to the sea. Thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Raji Surani. I just want to make sure that I clarify when I read his introduction that he's the coordinator of the Palestinian legal team who represents the victims at the International Criminal Court and a member of the South African legal team at the International Court of Justice. Thank you once again. Next, we will have Mr. Zain Dangor. Fadlan.
Good morning. Assalamu alaikum. So I'm not going to, Raji has gone through a lot of the elements of the legal, political stuff that I would have wanted to talk about, but I'm going to amplify some of that. But before I start there, I think just to amplify also what our Minister of Justice from Namibia said, and also Reverend Chikani, who came to remind me that I'm not just a speaker, I'm representing government. I wasn't sure if he's putting his old foresight hat on, which is as the head of the old foresight, to remind me to behave. I'll double check with him afterwards. But in the 1980s, the slogan on the T-shirts of the Namibian Students' Organization, NANSO, was, "Your freedom is our freedom." And that is something that's, Amanda. That was the solidarity between the South Africans and the Namibians. But that solidarity between the South Africans and Namibians was always internationalist in its flavor. So I just wanted to echo what the minister said there. And now that we have our freedom, at least the political freedom, we should be saying that our freedom is your freedom. And that is the essence of what our minister said, what Nelson Mandela has said, and this is then the issue of solidarity. So the panel talks today about politics, law, and activism. And in this room, you've got the embodiment of some of the best that speaks to politics, law, and activism. I'm going back to the 1980s just to give away my age. At one point, I was part of a South African Council of Churches youth delegation. And we were armed with a little booklet called Kairos for South Africa. And we were going to try and persuade the entire world why they should implement a BDS against apartheid South Africa. Edwin Ariston did not make it to one of the final conferences. He was arrested on the bus on the way to the plane. But it gives you a sense of when we talk about what I want to focus on is the arenas of advocacy. Edwin was perhaps, with one or two others, the only two people that should have been in a genuine SACC delegation. The rest of us were heathens. And the one who was supposed to open the prayer was Edwin when we got there, and he was in jail, so we were. But I raise these issues because when we talk about the arenas of struggle, there's national governments, which is an arena of struggle. There's the institutions of global governance, which is an arena of struggle, right? But there's also other arenas of struggle, and they need to actually be synergized. Mass mobilization is an important arena of struggle. Technical lobbying, I know people hate that term, becomes something that many of you do quite well. there's elections in the modern space as an arena of struggle. There's legislative advocacy and litigation as arenas of struggle. And the strategic use of all these tools in the various arenas is what we need to be looking at. You know, again, this is not just book talk. This is stuff that we looked at when we developed strategies. Reverend Malusi Mpumalwana is here. I'm not sure if he's still here. He was here yesterday. And, you know, leader of the BC movement in the early days. But his place in Grahamstown was a space where we actually looked at how we develop strategies along these lines. Which arenas do we use? When do we use them? How do we use them? And I think this is the moment when we're talking about a movement that we need to look at how do we build a movement that brings together all of those capacities in all of these arenas. We've got seasoned diplomats, yeah, like the former Director General of International Relations and Cooperation and also our ambassador in New York, who can share some of the experiences and pitfalls about international diplomacy and how international diplomacy can be used effectively to effect change. The point I'm raising, and it comes back to what Raju was saying, is not one strategy on its own is going to work. We need to use all of them strategically and see to what extent we can synergize them. And for me, that is the most important lesson from our experience that I think we want to bring to you. Just on the one element, the one arena, which is the use of the institutions of global governance. South Africa is of the view that these institutions are important, but as the Minister of Justice from Namibia pointed out, they are a creature of colonial construction, right? We need to use them, but reform them, but use them strategically.
No, it's impossible.
I was giving a similar talk to young
But I think we
lawyers
saw that because he
in the Western
apart from
Cape.
Zoom meeting.
And they were saying, why bother with these institutions if they are
Is
colonial
that
relics?
He looked
I think some of
out.
them may be in the
So who gave him the? Because he's the one who
the
locked the
point I
thing.
made,
How
you
did he
know,
come?
with the
I saw
ICC,
by mistake the
International
thing
Criminal
because I
Court,
thought
for
he's going to
example,
send it to Ali or whatever.
is look at who
Oh,
is
so that's
not
your
a
fault.
state party to the
You then
ICC.
motivated the
And ask yourself,
Then you because no, because then
right?
that's the problem.
The
This
big
guy
powers,
said-
the apex powers,
Is it again?
including the US and others, are not state parties. And when you interrogate why, and the engagement around why, you find the negotiation process through the establishment of the statute, is that for those powers, the use of force for them is a diplomatic tool. Armed force for them is a diplomatic tool, and they want to use that force without any form of accountability. And the institutions that gives rise to extraterritorial jurisdiction is what they don't want. They want to engage unfettered, without any form of accountability in what they do and how they do it. So it's no surprise to us when Congress people and senators would write a letter threatening the prosecutor of the ICC. Because that institution, as much as they want to control what it does, is not an institution that, if used properly, is in their interests. And they will threaten it and shut it down the moment their interests are challenged. And I think this is what I also want to bring to the attention as we build these movements. Be aware of how we engage with these institutions. We engage with them fully aware of the pitfalls, but we need to work to reform them. I've got 5 minutes, and I'm pretty sure I'll be done before. Similarly with the ICJ, as Raji has pointed out, the ICJ will not liberate Palestine, but engaging in those spaces. So our view on the leading up to the 29th of December and So again, apologies to some of you who did not know about this, and we spoiled your, Marin and others, spoiled your Christmas and New Year holidays in the process. We were fully aware of the fact that we may not be successful. But what we wanted to do was get into the ICJ, put the Palestinian narrative professionally and expertly on the world stage and hold Israel accountable. They should come to these institutions that they feel was designed for them to come and account to the world for their mass atrocities. And that creates a normative discussion, and it mobilizes people to then use the other arenas of struggle. We've seen, for example, the mass protests in Cape Town, in Istanbul, in all parts of the world. As a result of that kind of action, we hope, we went back for provisional orders yesterday again, and we think long and hard before we do this, but for us it's to hold them accountable in these institutions, and it's part of transforming these institutions. But that will be successful to the extent that it is buttressed by other strategies, the mass mobilization, the political building, movement building, the other forms of diplomacy, working with governments. The vote yesterday, for example, we've got my colleagues, Zahir Lahiri and others, who worked very hard behind the scenes to ensure that that vote carries the majority of the world's member states, and that the correct message comes out that the time for Palestinian freedom is now. Okay? So to conclude, I think I've run out of time. So in 86, towards the latter parts of the 80s, we were feeling that the moment for a change had emerged, and perhaps this is Palestine's South African moment. Let's seize it. Let's make sure that we mobilize using all the tools that we have available, and all the luck. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I was actually supposed to introduce Ali next, who hopefully will now be joining us, is available to join us. I think that Ali's time might be shorter, but we'll take whatever you can give us, Ali. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll give it over to Ali Abu Nama now.
You can hear me now. Good morning, everybody. I am in Amman, Jordan, and it is my sincere regret that I'm unable to be with you in South Africa.
I don't know, Ali,
like
if you're
the
muted, or just a moment. Hello, can you say something? Okay, we hear you. Yes, thank you. Yes, we can hear you. Thank you. Yes, we can hear you, Ali.
I'm joining you from Amman, Jordan, and it would have been my sincere wish to be with you in South Africa, in Johannesburg today. Like the great Raji Sourani, I have been to South Africa 3 times, and I can say that in my experience there, I've always felt that I've never been in a free country except when I've been in South Africa. Because the freedom of South Africa was earned the hard way, the only way, through struggle. And you can feel it, you can feel people of South Africa understand that. When I came to South Africa the last time, I think it was in 2010, I had the privilege and honor to speak at a number of cities, universities, communities in the towns around Cape Town and also in other parts of the country. And I made an argument. I said that South Africa was probably never going to be a global military superpower. That South Africa, being one of the really leading countries in Africa, may still have a few years ahead of it before it becomes a global economic superpower. But I argued that South Africa had the potential to be, and indeed was called upon to be, a global moral superpower. And I think what we've seen in our families in South Africa over the long and difficult months of this genocide proves that South Africa today is a moral superpower. South Africa is leading the world on the global stage in challenging the genocide, challenging Israel and its accomplices. And so I also want to express appreciation, which I know that many others have shared, and confirm what our comrade Captain said on behalf of every Palestinian. Thank you, South Africa. Thank you to the people of South Africa, including for going back to the International Court of Justice just yesterday, Friday, to demand additional provisional measures to order Israel to immediately cease and withdraw from its attack on Rafah. And, of course, the attack on Rafah is a repeat of what we've seen throughout the Gaza Strip over the past 7 months, but now with the added horror that Gaza has been completely sealed off from the outside world. The little relief came in through Rafah has now stopped completely. The few, I'm sorry, I'm getting a little bit of feedback. The few Palestinians who were able to exit Rafah for medical care or for any other purpose can no longer do so. The small number of medical delegations that were able to come in can no longer do so. So Gaza has been transferred into a giant death camp, and we should not be shy to use those words. And I think it is worth noting that this is happening just 2 days after the so-called civilized world marked what is called International Holocaust Remembrance Day. We saw revolting scenes, and I call them revolting scenes, of the German ambassador in Tel Aviv posing for photographs with elderly survivors of the Warsaw Ghetto, while it is the German government that murdered the Jews in the Warsaw Ghetto. It is today the German government that is assisting Israel to murder Palestinians in the Gaza ghetto. And I wonder that if Holocaust remembrance, as practiced by the perpetrators of the European genocide of European Jews, leads to more Holocausts, then perhaps forgetting is better. But I don't believe forgetting is better. I believe that actually learning from history is what we have to do, what we're called upon to do. And we cannot be led to despair by the sheer hypocrisy of the so-called civilized world. But what we've seen in the past 7 months of this genocide is really the mask pulled off every element of this global system of domination and empire. that didn't end, unfortunately, with the formal decolonization of Africa, of Asia, of the Middle East in the years after World War II. As we know too well, new forms of colonialism asserted themselves. And now, I believe that the real struggle to decolonize the world is only just beginning. But it is happening, and we see it across Africa now, in Niger, in Chad, in Mali, in other countries that are expelling the French neocolonialists. And the same should be done with the American neocolonialists and so-called AFRICOM, the American military command that is setting up bases all over Africa. And the same has to happen in the Middle East, in West Asia, the so-called Middle East, where we are seeing now countries and movements coming together to create a wall of resistance which is finally rolling back American imperialism. And with it, Israeli domination, apartheid, ethnic cleansing, and genocide. I believe that what we're seeing now, as painful and difficult, as horrifying as it is the decolonization in action. This is what decolonization looks like. And I know that it is fashionable in the world to talk about decolonization, particularly in the academies of the United States. But some are unwilling to, what's the term? If you will the ends, you have to will the means. And that means we have to understand that being polite victims, being good victims, simply petitioning our persecutors, our murderers, has never worked and is not going to work. And therefore to understand that the role of the resistance, the armed resistance, is legitimate, that this is part of the struggle. And it is a struggle that can't succeed by itself, but that has to be complemented by a global struggle. I'm old enough to remember when I came to university in 1989 in the United States, that there were encampments at the time. I remember them very well. They called them shanties, in solidarity with the struggle in South Africa, and also the struggle against the US arming and funding of genocidal death squads across Central America, in Nicaragua and Guatemala and other countries. I remember we took part in unauthorized protests. I remember at my university, the president at the time, George Herbert Walker Bush, Bush Sr., came and received an honorary degree, and there were huge student protests against that. I remember, too, that there were protests against military recruitment on campus and against CIA recruitment at university job fairs. And I don't remember a single occasion when universities anywhere in the United States at that time called in police thugs to beat up their own students, expelled students from their universities, and threatened them with other forms of repression and discipline. What we're seeing now in terms of repression is unprecedented since the United States, since the 1960s, when campuses across the United States and around the world were protesting the American genocide in Vietnam. And I say this because I think it's important to recognize that this reaction, or let's call it overreaction, is a sign that the system is cracking, that the hegemony of this imperial system is finally breaking. And it is breaking not as the result of the actions of those at the top, of the prosecutors at the International Criminal Court, or the judges at the ICJ. It is breaking first and foremost because of the steadfastness and resilience of the people in Palestine on the ground, and their resistance, and the solidarity all over the world. And it's often been spoken about that we are in, or we have hoped for, the South Africa moment. For the first time in my life, I feel we're at that moment when the momentum is such that it is unstoppable. We've already seen just in the past few days 2 universities on the island of Ireland commit to divestment. We've seen dozens of universities in Spain jointly commit to ending all ties with Israeli institutions, all of which, without exception, are complicit in this genocide. Now, I just want to say in a couple of minutes left that the role that I think that me and my colleagues play as independent journalists, and I know that there are journalists in the audience today, including some of my colleagues, and I wish I could have been there with you. One of the major elements of this genocide is being committed, as we know, using the 2,000-pound bombs provided by President Joe Biden. It's being committed through starvation, through cutting off water, through epidemic disease, biological warfare, which is now spreading across Gaza. It is being committed by siege and steel and iron and fire. But there is another element to this genocide that is no less lethal, and that is the atrocity propaganda Israel and its accomplices have been using against the Palestinian people since October 7th. From the first moments of the resistance operation, which successfully attacked and defeated the Israeli military's so-called Southern Division in its bases, attacking its soldiers, attacking its commanders, its radars, its surveillance systems, its $1.5 billion fence. But because this defeat was so humiliating for Israel, was so incomprehensibly devastating, they invented a completely different and new story, a story of dozens of beheaded babies, stories of children being tied up and burned, stories of families being murdered at their dinner tables, stories of a pregnant woman having her womb cut open and the fetus taken out of it, and so many other atrocity stories that even now the Israelis themselves have had to admit were entirely fabricated and false. And one of the most pernicious atrocity stories that they're still sticking to, even though they have not uncovered or presented a shred of credible evidence for, is this story that on October 7th, Palestinian fighters engaged in systematic use of sexual violence as a weapon of war. I will say to you, it did not happen. How do we know it didn't happen? We've investigated it. Other independent news outlets have investigated it. And even though they keep coming back with this story, it is now thoroughly discredited. And while I said that they came up with new stories to cover up their military failure on October 7th, what we know is that these are old stories. And when I go back and I look at the history of the struggle in South Africa, and a few years ago I wrote a paper on this, you could see in the newspapers of apartheid South Africa in the 1950s and 60s and 70s, atrocity story after atrocity story, which unfailingly depicted African people, not just in South Africa, but across the continent, as murderous savages who would slaughter and rape and kill the moment they got their hands on the levers of power. And this atrocity propaganda, this portrayal of indigenous, colonized, enslaved people as barbarians, has a long history coming from the so-called West. It was used in the conquest of North America. It was used during the Jim Crow era of apartheid in South Africa. It's still used today in Europe, where you can read on extreme right-wing website after website about lies about Muslim refugees coming to Europe and engaging in epidemics of sexual assault and so on. And this atrocity propaganda is designed first and foremost to dehumanize the victims, to make it easy to kill them, to build support for their murder and their extermination. And so I just want to take this opportunity to salute those in the media who are standing up to this. Because here although I'm in Jordan, I normally reside in the United States, in the so-called West, the media have played a diabolical role in spreading and perpetuating this murderous atrocity propaganda. So I want to emphasize again the importance of all media, large and small, in challenging these lies, in having the courage to do so, because that propaganda is no less a weapon of war as the bombs that come from Germany, from Britain, from France, and first and foremost from the United States. I want to say, finally, a word of just to keep in our thoughts also the prisoners in Palestine, particularly those in the torture camps. I'm thinking in particular of, just to give one representative, Ahmed Ajrami, a Palestinian, a young Palestinian who has been missing for months. His brother, Tamer, wrote an article for the Electronic Intifada just a few days ago, saying that his family has no idea where Ahmed is. He used quite terrifying imagery when he said, "We don't know if Ahmed is buried in a mass grave, if his body has been devoured by dogs, or if he disappeared into one of these Israeli torture camps," the first leaked images of which we saw just a day ago coming from none other than CNN. And it strikes me that now, for many Palestinians in Gaza and for their family members outside, the best case scenario would be to learn that your loved one is in one of these horrifying concentration camps where systematic torture is being used, because at least you'd know they were alive. That is the state we've reached. But I sincerely believe, I have never believed more firmly, with more conviction, that the day of liberation is coming, and much sooner than many of us think. And it is in large part, indeed it can only be because of this global solidarity, particularly from South Africa, the world's moral superpower. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ali. We're so glad you can join us. We wish that you were here, but we're so happy that we managed through the technical difficulties and we can hear your statement. Thank you very much. And finally, we will call on Roshan Dadu, who will lead us for the last part of the panel.
Watin Tabafazi. He's trying to tell me I get 10 minutes. If you strike a woman, you strike a rock, Comrade Naim. But I'll try to be brief. Amandla. Comrades, yesterday I think we heard very powerful speeches. And I think, my God, we really needed, after 7 months of the genocide, of the sort of things that Ali Abunimah was just describing, the reporting that we get from the mainstream Western media. We really needed to feel stirred up and inspired and recommit to our solidarity. And I think we are duly mobilized. When people came out of the room yesterday at the end of the day, normally people are tired after the first day of a conference. But I think Comrade Frank is right. We came out with a feeling of inspiration. We came out wanting to get back into the plenary room this morning, which is also a sign that we're ready for action. But I think, you know, the fine words that we heard yesterday, we must remember that they butter no parsnips, as they say in the UK. They are meaningless without action. And so we have to now, today, look at what action we're going to take. And I think this panel was designed to indicate ways in which we can start thinking strategically, how we can start linking the struggle on the ground in Palestine, as Comrade Raji was saying, with the legal work the legal team has been doing, as Zain was saying, trying to synergize what action and activists, many of whom are us in the room here, can do in order to come together with a strategy that will grow the anti-apartheid movement and build upon all the work that we've already been doing. So with that in mind, I think we should remind ourselves that we are not, of course, I think Abdul Minty mentioned yesterday, our immediate task, end the genocide. And again, I think that's where we need to really focus on how we as activists, and in fact, the minister is always saying this in her speeches, calling on us as activists to act. So it gives legitimacy to the South African legal team to take the case further. And as we've just heard, even further than the third set of provisional measures, I think. But it requires our activism. It requires all of the disruptions that we do, all of the protests, all of the meetings, all of the webinars, all of the ways in which we try to get into the media in order to change the narrative. It requires all of that for them to be able to have the legitimacy to say we stand as South Africans here in front of the highest UN court and present the case that we believe it is genocide. And I think it's really worth everyone having a look at the original submission, because it's sort of like a Bible and it stops you having to try and find things all over the place. It really comes together and the referencing is very good. So you can find nearly every bit of information you need to back up in changing the narrative, back up what we are saying, back up with other UN reports, with other reports on all the various issues mentioned. So that's one thing I think we should look at in terms of action, how we build on that. But we're not just here until the genocide ends. We're not just here until tomorrow, or indeed the day after. Because we know, as we've been hearing throughout the conference so far, we are here as an anti-apartheid movement to end settler colonialism and apartheid, to dismantle it, to dismantle the system until the refugees are returning to their homes and Palestine is really free. But at the same time, we're not here to tell the Palestinians how to run their struggle, how to conduct their struggle any more than we wanted to be told. Did we want to be told by others how we should conduct our struggle? We wanted support. We determined the ways in which we resisted. And I think everyone in this room supports the Palestinians' right to resist in the ways in which they deem appropriate across the terrain of struggle that they face. And if anyone does not, then I think they're contravening contravening international law, in fact, because the Palestinian people, as all people under occupation, have a right to resist that occupation. But it's how do we manifest our support? And I think it's safe to say, comrades, that amongst Palestinians there is a consensus that our weapon is in international solidarity, one of the powerful weapons we can wield, is BDS, boycotts, divestments, and sanctions. And I think in South Africa, we know this, and the Palestinian call on the international community was modeled very closely on our struggle and our call, as Comrade Ronnie spoke about the 4 pillars, the pillar of international solidarity, where we issued the call on the international community for boycotts, divestments, and sanctions. Why? Because it hurts. It hurts the enemy. It hurt apartheid South Africa. It hurt it economically, ultimately, as we achieved sanctions, even though it took decades of hard work by activists. Before even cell phones and laptops, we were literally folding leaflets and putting them in envelopes in the post to get information about campaigns that are out, to get information that was very hard to get of what was going on inside South Africa and how the struggle was being waged by people on the ground here. And I think, you know, because of that, our struggles are so connected, as has been said. I think, you know, the first, it was mentioned, 2001, Raji, the Durban conference, the World Conference on Racism that was held in Durban, where the question of calling out Israel as an apartheid state, a systematic system of oppression, of fragmentation, of discrimination, came about in the civil society conference, actually, at the time. But now we've seen progress in getting our government to accept that framework. And even more than that, I think our government has gone far beyond taking that framework of apartheid into understanding how genocide and ethnic cleansing, the ways in which we say apartheid in Palestine is way worse than it was here, how that works and how to challenge that. So I think, you know, the call in 2005 from Palestine, from the largest coming together of Palestinian civil society, reflecting trade unions, reflecting grassroots structures across Palestine, calling on the international community, coming together in Palestine as a committee, a democratic structure, the BDS National Committee. We in South Africa picked up that call very quickly because, of course, as I said, it was modeled on our own. And I think we also don't need to reinvent the wheel, because if we ask Comrade Abdul Minty, who has a filing cabinet of a brain around our anti-apartheid struggle, but in fact we don't even need to bother him, because Comrade Christabel Gurney, who couldn't come to the conference, was behind digitizing the anti-apartheid movement's archives. And I think if you look in there, you see every button, every badge, every poster, all the kinds of documents that we had around the time, the strategies, the campaigns, and it can give us inspiration. We don't want to do exactly the same thing where it's not applicable. But I was looking the other day, and I remembered the boycott bus. It was a double-decker bus, and it was like a campaign on wheels, like an office on wheels, and it would drive around. So if you're having a protest in Glasgow, you'd ask for the bus to come, and the bus would come with all the pamphlets and everything on it. It was brilliant, until I think it lasted about 3 years, and then fascists burnt it down. It was very sad. But things like that, let's think about those sorts of things that maybe we don't think about in terms of building and keeping connected, because I've seen comrades here that we engage all the time, but we've never met in real life, and that's just in Cape Town, let alone comrades from around the world that are here. So another thing, actually, I found in the archives, I think Comrade John Minto is here, was a detail, it's being live streamed, but it was a detailed plan of how they went about getting into the rugby matches in the UK when they disrupted the Springboks playing there. It was really interesting. I thought that might be something useful for us to look at in terms of sports boycotts. But yes, I wanted to also emphasize that the anti-apartheid movement wasn't just about South Africa. The Comrade Minister will remember the Namibia Support Committee that worked with the anti-apartheid movement very closely. We also had the Mozambique, Angola, Guinea-Bissau Committee, MAGIC as it was called. And we worked closely together in solidarity with the struggles across our continent at that time. And of course, the Namibian struggle, the Namibia Support Committee, we always worked with them as the anti-apartheid movement. And I think that spirit of internationalism is reflected here as well. I mean, I can see comrades from Africa networks, from Comrade Zahid is here, I think Comrade Naomi is here, Comrade Emma, I think, should be here. And I think that's an area, when we go into the workshops, we also need to think about building on that existing global movement and seeing how we can make it even stronger and keep to come together, in this way again in order to do so. Also, in terms of Africa, the African Charter, I think we should make use of this charter. It commits us to struggle against Zionism. It says Zionism in it. It doesn't just say racism and colonialism and settler colonialism and so on. It actually says Zionism. And I think that should guide us in taking the struggle to countries in the continent that are normalizing with Israel. We saw Malawi just recently opening an embassy. They've been threatening this for a long time. Opening an embassy in Israel in the midst of a genocide. And we have comrades in Malawi who are campaigning for, against this. They're really trying to raise up the issue of Palestine in Malawi. And again, I think that we need to support each other in that regard. So that was just a few points that I thought we could think about in going into the workshops coming up, and really make use of those workshops so we come out not just with fine words in the declaration, but actually action points that will take us to build the movement bigger, better, broader, and ultimately manage to tie together all the ways in which we've been struggling with the Palestinians' resistance on the ground, to the point that we, as Ali Abunimah said, and hopefully he's right, very soon see that Liberation Day coming. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Roshan Dadu, Ali Abunimah, Zain Dangur, and Raji Surani. In the interest of time, we will unfortunately have to compromise on the Q&A so that we can catch up. We did it yesterday, miraculously, so hopefully we will end today on time. We'll end with a chant, maybe. From the river to the sea. From the river to the sea. From the sea to the river. We'll lift. From the sea to the river. Thank you so much. Thank you. I'll give it over to Naim Gina. Thank you.
Amandla! 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 Comrades, I have to do this quickly. Thank you very much. You may leave. I have to do this quickly because they're going to take away the teas, coffees, and cakes. So that's also why we don't have questions. Couple of announcements. One is, Ms. T. Fredericks, you lost your credit or debit card, your debit card. Please come and collect it from me with ID, please. Secondly, for all the international guests, please see Faria afterwards to make sure that your airport transfers are organized, especially those who are leaving tomorrow. If you don't do that today, you might not have transport to the airport. Thirdly, please, comrades, social media, using our hashtag Palestine Africa 2024, we're really not doing a good enough job. I know everyone's exhausted and all of that, but please do. The workshops. We have 6 workshops now and then 6 workshops thereafter. I'm going to talk about all of them now. The first set of workshops are the thematic workshops. In these workshops with the different themes, each workshop will have a speaker or 2 speakers that will make brief inputs and then a discussion to follow. In the discussion, you will look at very quickly the state of play in terms of that particular workshop. So, for example, BDS, the state of play, and then how that campaign, whatever it might be, prisoners, for example, or interfaith, whatever it is, how that might be enhanced, built on, strengthened, and be part of a global network or a global movement. Those are your 2 tasks. Whatever comes out of these workshops will feed into the plan of action that will be drawn up by the drafting committee tonight. So please take this very seriously. The whole conference, really, the success of the conference depends on what comes out of today and today's workshops. The second set of workshops, you'll see in your program, so I'm not going to do a briefing on that, I'm doing it now, are the regional workshops. So we have 6 regions, Asia Pacific, North America, Latin America, Africa, Arab world, and Europe. Okay? You've decided, well, you'll go into the workshops that are relevant for you. Again, very quickly, the state of play of solidarity in your region, but more importantly, how do you want to build solidarity in that region and link that to a global movement and global campaign, etc. Right? Again, what comes out of the regional workshops will feed into the plan of action that we will all adopt tomorrow. So let's be very serious about this, and this is moving forward. Let me just then say where you will go, all the different workshops. Workshop 1, boycotts, divestment and sanctions in boardroom 6.
You'll find the boardrooms named outside. Workshop 2, Workshop 2, Interfaith Activities and Campaigns, Committee Room 3. Okay, I hope you're making note of this. Workshop 3, Changing the Narrative, Committee Room 2. Workshop 4, Actions in the Legal and Multilateral Spheres, Boardroom 7. Workshop 5, Palestinian Popular and Other Struggles Against Settler Colonialism and Apartheid, Plenary, here. Workshop 6, Supporting Palestinian Political Prisoners and Humanitarian Support, Committee Room 1. Okay? Got that? You can talk to Dudu or me or Lauren outside if you're confused. Then for the second set of workshops, Asia Pacific, Committee Room 1. North America, Boardroom 7. Latin America, Committee Room 3. Africa, here, Plenary Room. That's because there's so many Africans here, of course. Arab World, Boardroom 6. Europe, Committee Room 2. Any questions? All that is clear? You've all taken notes? Thank you. Amandla! Yeah. Wait, before you leave.
Those who come from, if in one country there are many, let them spread themselves into different workshops, please.
Just a word of advice, comrades, for the thematic workshops. If you find that in the workshop that you are in have many people from the country you're in, this excludes South Africans, of course, there'll be many people of you in all the workshops, then try and spread yourselves around into the different workshops so that, from each country you're covering all the workshops. Thank you. Comrades, we're not taking a separate tea break. course, makes connecting with the audience a little more difficult. But is there a roving mic around, comrades? Roving mic? Yeah? Okay. In front? Where? Where? Okay, he's bringing it. So, Comrade Fadi is the Popular Struggles Coordinator, Senior Director at Avaz. He's also been in and out of jail for good reasons. We hope you don't go back to jail, but if you do, we'll know it'll be for good reasons again. So I'm going to hand over to Fadi. He's got a presentation that you can see, and he'll make the initial input, and then we'll open it up for discussion. As we said, it's critical because this will feed into the plan of action that we develop. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Naim. So a few things. I was actually arrested for selling cocaine. No, I'm just kidding. You were mistaken, Naim. No. So I've been arrested by both the Israeli military and the Palestinian Authority. I also want to say, just for the broader context of this session, we're going to be, and if it's okay for the tech, our friends at tech, if you can put the presentation back on the screen, if that's okay. Thank you. So, first of all, I want to say that my main goal in this presentation is to provide you all with a contextual analysis of this moment in Palestine, so that when we go into discussing opportunities for popular struggle and other forms of resistance, we're discussing it and analyzing it based on strategy. Because a crucial point to remember is all forms of resistance are tools to achieve the broader goals. They are not goals in and of themselves. The second point that I want to just highlight right now is usually when I give this type of presentation, when I engage in these types of workshops, it's not televised. People don't have their phones in the room. It's not in a public event where you all look trustworthy, except you in the corner, but that's another question. But the main thing is it's going to require us to be extra sensitive, because I have been arrested, but I prefer to be arrested based on things that are impactful, not based on giving a presentation. So this means that some of the language I use, some of the things that we are capable of discussing in this room may be very high level, may not be as deep as some of you would like. That's a necessity, you know, and if for those of you who are interested in a deeper discussion, we can have those one-on-one, we can engage together. But I ask you to respect that, not just for myself. I have many other Palestinian colleagues in this room, and this is a very sensitive moment for us where people that are just posting "God help us" on Facebook are being arrested. And the situations in prison, I don't know if you've seen the recent whistleblower report, but the amounts of torture and other tactics being used on individuals are severe. So as Palestinians, part of our organizing requires us to take these things into account. So with that said, I think the first structure I want to put, the first framework I want to put on our conversation is that our responsibility now as Palestinians and as people who believe in freedom, justice, and dignity for all is to shift the game from one of unending Nakba, from a game where the dispossession of Palestinians has only been accelerating for the last 75, 76 years, to a framework, a new game, where we go from the century of colonization into the decade of liberation. So that's the mindset we want to engage here. And it's a different mindset, and it's crucial when we think strategically. So some of the questions I'm going to try and answer for you before we open this up into a broader discussion are going to be, where do we want to go? Where are we now? What are some next steps, broadly speaking, in the Palestinian resistance strategy and popular struggle? And last but not least, important considerations for you to keep in mind. So let's get started. one of the things that we've been doing within Palestinian society at large, I mean, there's always a big elephant in the room when we discuss Palestinian strategy and vision, and that is the fragmentation of the Palestinian people and the lack of a unified national liberation movement or unified national liberation front. So one of the key things that we've been doing as Palestinian youth has been engaging with the different sectors of Palestinian society, and I prefer people don't take images of the presentation if that's okay, if it's okay not to take pictures.